Hey everybody, my name is Chad. This is the Wisco Boater channel. Welcome back to another episode of the Bosun 11 build. As you can see behind me, I've got a nice new sheet of plywood sitting here. This is ACX plywood. Marine grade is not called out in the plans, just regular plywood. So I decided to go with ACX plywood just because it has a much nicer finish to it with very few, if any, repairs. So the two pieces of plywood that I picked out do not have any repairs, and by repairs I mean that little oval shaped filler that you see a lot of non-ACX panels have. This one and the sheet that's out in the garage do not have any. This piece of plywood actually has a little bit of a curve to it already, so I think it's going to work nicely for the sides. The side that I'm going to put on the inside actually looks a little bit nicer, but not really concerned about that since this is going to be a painted boat anyway. So you start with the sides. I've got two pieces of 4x8 plywood, which will give me enough for both sides of the boat, as well as two full-length pieces to go on the bottom. Now the plans say to start with the sides, and to do that you put the plywood at the aft end, so it just barely overlaps the transom. I'm gonna have to lift it up just a little bit so that it just comes up to the gunnels, and I'll figure out some way to fix or clamp that in place or lift it up with some boards somehow. I'll get it in place. And then on from the inside, after it's clamped in place, I need to trace every frame member, the chine, and the gunnel so that I can pull it off and then start drilling holes for screws. That's what I'm going to work on today. We'll start on this side. We'll see how it goes. And of course, as with any boat project, I've said this a number of times before, first side's gonna be the learning side, the second side will go much easier. So I'll figure out how to get this kind of temporarily put in position so that I can start making frames, and then I'll show you what that looks like. So I've got the plywood clamped up off the ground and right up against the gunnel. It overlaps about a half of an inch all the way down. I've got it clamped here and then lightly clamped on that end because I'm using a stiffener because my clamp isn't quite deep enough to reach up inside there and clamp to the chine. But what this is going to allow me to do is just mark along the chine so that I can make the initial cut to get rid of all this excess. Once I have that cut to just barely oversize, then I'll be able to clamp it from the gunnel and the chine, get it nice and tight up against the frames, and then I can start marking it quite a bit easier. So I'm gonna work my way into the boat amongst the stiffeners, being very careful not to fall over and break something, myself or the boat, and get that line marked on the chine so I can get this board cut. I just used the jigsaw to roughly cut the side piece here. You can see it's back inside and clamped in place. Just a minimal extra material along the chine here, and basically the same thing down here for the gunnel. This doesn't require a ton of clamping pressure, so that's why I've used some of these cheaper clamps here. They're tool shop, just basic, real cheapy stuff. Don't have to really wrench down on these with the all metal screw type clamps. But it's tight enough to where I'll now take a pencil and mark where the frames will come into contact with the sides, and right here where the board ends, there'll be another piece that goes from there all the way up to the stem, and then there'll be a backing board on that seam. So once I get the frames marked, then I can pull the side back off and then back drill holes where the frames are, come back in, clamp it again, and then I can drill holes into the frame to where I can get screws in place to actually put it on. This really is not that difficult of a thing to do. With 1/4 inch plywood, it bends so easily. You see it's got a real nice contour already, front to back. And this here, this curve, I'll just make sure to match it to the front piece right there. And we'll probably use, well, this curve might have to come in a little bit to get the two seams to come together. We'll figure it out. But this really is not that difficult. All right, if I show the inside here, see I've got pencil lines all around the framework, gunnels and chines, all the way back. And this will include around the joints, the deck support, all the way back to the transom, inside and out. So now that everything's marked with a pencil on the frames, I can unclamp it again, take it out in the garage, and I can start drilling some holes. I do believe that the instructions are specific if using screws. If screws are used, drill the panel for them at 3-inch intervals. And I will be using screws, brass. So I'll measure out 3-inch intervals, and I'll bring it back in and clamp it in place yet again. I'll use the holes that I back drilled to drill holes into the frame, and then I'll install some screws. All right, here's where I'm cutting the wood and drilling holes. I thought I should probably show this before I take it back in and clamp it back in place, but you can easily see the lines for the frame, and I've got all the holes drilled at 3-inch intervals, front to back. So this is ready to go back in, clamp back in place, and then we'll drill the frame using these holes as guides, and then throw some screws in. All right, so I got the board drilled for all the holes. Now, one thing I'm going to do before I screw it to this side is I'm going to take this board and just kind of loosely see if it fits on the other side. Because if it does, I can use this as a template for the other side. Actually, you know what? I'm not going to do that. Well, yeah, I can do that just to check, just to get the rough. This is a rough cut board. I don't have any angles for the transom cut on it yet. I do have a 1/2 inch down to about 1/4 of an inch of overhang beyond the gunnels and chines. So this is going to be a little bit difficult to do because I can't open the garage door right now. While I was working on this piece, it started raining. I don't know how well you'll be able to see through the screen, but well, here's a better look. This is what the radar looks like right now, and it's just gross outside. So I can't open the garage door. We don't have our sunshade or rain awning put up yet for the summer, for the spring and summer. So if I open the garage door, I'm just gonna get a bunch of water in here, and I don't want that. But I think I can maybe, I don't know if this is going to work or not, because I'm not really going to be able to support that end. But I'm going to drop this down. And just see if this is fairly close. It should be. Obviously, these are built to mirror. The sides are built to mirror each other. So I'm going to use my foot here to kind of bring that up. See if I can eyeball this. Yeah, I'm not going to be able to get it pushed in far enough. All right, well, that didn't work. Not a big deal. This whole process to get to this point took maybe an hour. So I'll use the other piece of board, the cutoff from this, to do the same thing I just did. Now it says to build the sides first, to cover the sides first. Since I can't open that garage door, I might, I don't have any, I might have some cardboards, because I have to use a piece of cardboard up front here, because where the bend takes place is it goes down towards the the bow tip from the chine right here goes back. That's going to require a cardboard template first. And I don't know if I have that. I'll look and see. So I may end up getting stuck until this rain stops. And I also just thought of something else. I am going to run low on brass screws. Now for this 1/4" plywood, I'm going to use the 1" number 8 brass screws. I got a box of 100 and I bet I've used 30 of them on various parts of the stringers and stiffeners and stuff. So I'm gonna have to order more boxes of these to do the rest anyway. So maybe when I get done with this side, that'll just be it for today. I was hoping to get a good few hours on the boat project today, but I was anticipating the rain to start later this afternoon, early evening, but it came early, so oh well. I'll keep working on this side. All right, so I just realized one more problem. I just mentioned these 1" screws, and if I use 1" screws on the 1/4" plywood and run it right down to where the head is flush, I'm gonna be a 1/16 to an 1/8 too long. So I can use the 1" screws along the frames. That's not a big deal, so I'll go ahead and do that. And I'll put a couple screws in up here just to keep the board tight. But that's a bummer too. I'm gonna have to order some 7/8" number 8 brass screws. So, yep, this day's gonna end early, unfortunately. One thing I do want to show before I put screws in is I did take a larger bit, I think a 3/8 bit, and countersunk all these holes. That way the head of the screw sits flush without cracking any of the wood around it or splintering anything up. So it does call for this in the plans. So there we go. First panel piece, semi-installed. I did not put in every screw just because it's gonna have to come back off again. I did, well, almost every other, but came out really good. No weird sounds or cracking. So as soon as this rain lets up, I'll start working on the other side. In the meantime, I'll order some screws, and we'll come back to work on this. And now, a couple days later, I've got some screws that I was able to pick up at the local hardware store. I did order some more 3/4" screws from Amazon. Can't find any 7/8 brass screws anywhere. Well, I shouldn't say that. I didn't check with MasterCar, but didn't find them on Amazon, didn't find them at Ace Hardware, but 3/4 screws will work just fine. So I've got some screws to work with. I also cut another piece of the 4x8 sheet of 1/4" JCX plywood so that I can start working on the piece that's gonna go from the edge of this board up to the stem. I'm probably wasting some material here because this second board that I bought was gonna be for the bottom, but in measuring this, if I were to use just one board, I was gonna end up short in width. So I'm gonna have to buy 2 more boards, 2 more pieces of plywood, which is fine. But since I have these 2 pieces of plywood on, I'm gonna go ahead and use what I have on hand to keep working in the meantime. So I'm gonna finish out this side and then work on the other side. It's not raining, it's really, really cold out again today though, so I'm not sure I really wanna open the door quite yet, but maybe sometime in the next couple days it'll get up into the 40s and it'll be all right. But I'm gonna do what I can with what I've got on hand. So this board I'm gonna clamp in position just like I did the main side piece here, as you just saw. figure out how to wrap it around. There's gonna be some interesting angles to work with up near the stem. Probably gonna end up having to use some filler wood or chop strand fiber resin in order to fill the gaps. But I think it's gonna make the deck look really cool. So I'll show you what I mean when I get there, but for now, I'm gonna get this clamped in place, get it cut, and then figure out how to get it wrapped around. We'll get it wrapped around up to the stem. This piece is a little different. It's a little more complicated than even I was anticipating. My thought was, and I don't know why I was really thinking this, was that the bottom edge, the finished edge of the plywood was just gonna go straight with the gunnel because the gunnel is level. But because it's at a pretty decent angle, and you can see it still has a little bit more to lean there, it's actually bringing the bottom edge up, which means I had to slide it down on both ends. So I've got just minimal overhang in the middle here, and then quite a bit of overhang on either end of it. Also, this finished edge here does not match up with the finished edge here. You can see how much overlap there is and how much trimming I'm going to have to do to make that match. And I think this will be a little bit more manageable once I get this excess cut off. But for now, I'm just going to do the best I can to get a close to correct size piece using the pencil to mark the line where I need to cut, and then I'll come back and work with a more manageable piece because this is just unwieldy. So I've got the rough piece cut and clamped in place as I trip over a clamp. The seam here came out perfect. I was just very, very slow and purposeful with the jigsaw, and I think I like the curve rather than flattening it out. So I think what I'll do in order to join these two seams here is to use another piece of 1/4 inch plywood on the inside to make the joint. But this all looks pretty good on the inside here. So I'm going to mark everything with a pencil, and then I can trim off. Actually, I may not even need to trim off much right now. Just want to get everything marked so that I can get holes drilled and get it screwed in place. And at that point, I can start using my poster board that I ran to get the other night and figure out the contour as the bottom board starts to make its curve here towards the front of the stem. Use cardboard to make the template, transfer that to a piece of 4x8 sheet, and then you can lay that out and lay everything down. All right, so I've got the front section of the side of the hull drilled. The skin is drilled. I need to drill the frame. It went well. There was some cracking noises up front here when I made this bend. This is real tight here. I think everything's okay, and getting screws in place will help everything obviously, but it always makes me a little bit nervous when things start to creak and crack. But I'm going to drill every one of these holes to the frame underneath, throw some screws in, remove the clamps, and see how it looks. Here we have the front section of the hull side in place. I put every single screw in just to be sure nothing was going to move. Next, I think I'm gonna work on the joint right there. Since it's all in place, I might as well work on getting that done. It's just gonna be probably a 3-inch wide strip of plywood on the inside. And I've had success in getting the front panel screwed in place with the joint. You can see here there's screws in place. The joint on the inside looks just like that. It's just a 3-inch wide piece of ACX marked at 3-inch screw intervals. That drew the two pieces together. I'll probably have a little bit of sanding to do right here. It's a little tight. I did have to file it down just a little bit in that area to get it to sit flush, and that's almost there. Just when I pull the skins back off, I'll get that part sanded. So I'm either going to work on trimming off the excess on along the chine and then on the transom as well as the stem, or if it warms up just a little bit, I'll open up the garage door and work on that side. Once that side's on, I can actually move the entire boat this way because it's not going to twist or shift or anything because the skins will keep everything in place. But need just a little bit more warmer weather to get that other side done. So really happy with the way this turned out. This looks awesome. All right, so it's a few days later again, Sunday afternoon. Honestly, I'm not really in the mood to work on the boat today, but it's cold out. Got the garage door open, 33 degrees, but we're supposed to get like an inch of snow tonight, which means I don't know if it's gonna be here tomorrow. And if rain comes after the snow, I'm not gonna be able to open the garage door. So anyway, got a dry day today. It's cold and cloudy, but I'm gonna go ahead and get the other side of the hull finished up. Well, not finished up, but at least mostly installed so we can wrap this video up. But I'm gonna set the camera up and just do a little fast forward on this part. It's exactly the same as the starboard side, which is already done. So we'll just enjoy some music here while I fast forward through making and installing the port side hull sides. All right, here's the port side, hull sides installed. Pretty much just not enough room back there to get the drill and screwdriver in. So I've just got the bottom clamped in place right now. I'll move it around just a little bit to get that taken care of, but got this piece wrapped around the front, and I also trimmed off down the stem, just rough cut. I'll sand that down later. And got the joint put in place. Screws are way too long, but that's all I had on hand for now. So those will get replaced. But both sides of the hull are now complete. It's looking great. So thanks for watching this episode of the Bosun 11 build, everybody. Appreciate it. Hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, tell all your friends, and send me some comments if you like. We'll see you next time on the Wisco Boater channel, and happy boating, everybody.